I'd like to show you where we're going to be touring today. So here's a map of North America, and we're going to be right here in the Niagara region. Close up, you can see that here we are between two of the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And here you can see that this is the area of Niagara Falls, and we will be going between the northern end of Niagara Falls into Queenston and St. David's, Ontario. This diagram shows the actual route that we drove on this tour, with the little red dots being stops along the way. So today's first location is going to be in the parking lot of Fireman's Park, which is located at the north end of Niagara Falls along Mountain Road. Now, before we start talking about anything to do with railroads, you do have to remember that the reason a lot of stuff happened in Niagara Falls is because of this, because of the waterfalls, Niagara Falls themselves. Wherever you have moving water, you have the potential to create energy. And so, in 1918, the first large-scale hydroelectric generation project in the world started right here in Niagara Falls. They needed a railroad to move their large equipment and the dirt and everything else that needed to be moved, and that's when the Hydroelectric Power Commission Railroad began, and for 2 years it was Canada's busiest railroad. The Hydro Canal project was basically digging a big, long trench through the city. And when you're digging, you're going to have rocks and dirt. And where does that stuff go? You have to bring it somewhere. So there were two main dump sites in the city. At the south end, they dumped the overburden in Kalar and McLeod Road. And here in the north end, the dump was at Dorchester and Mountain Road. So where we're standing right now in this parking lot was the entrance to the main disposal area here in the north end of the project. This photograph was taken also where we are standing right now, but in 1918, looking to the northwest, and you can see an electric locomotive and spreader on top of the dump. They are dumping the rocks and dirt and other material from the digging project, and they're creating fingers or mini long mountains of dumped material in this location. Now, if you're standing in the parking lot of today and you look south towards Mountain Road, on a 45-degree angle, you will see that there's the entrance to a walking trail. It's called the Haulage Road Recreational Trail. And this is interesting because this was actually the railroad that went from today, where Fireman's Park is, 45-degree through part of the city to where today is Stanley Avenue. And it's called Haulage Road because it was used twice as a road. The first time was when they were building the first hydroelectric plant, and this was a railroad. And that's when they were digging the tunnels, and they were bringing all the material out here to dump it. The second time that they used this as a road was when they were building the second hydroelectric generating power plant, and that was in the 1950s, and they were using this as a truck haulage road for the same reason. They were bringing out the dirt and the rock to this location to dump it. standing above what was the Michigan Central Railroad. And if you look behind us, you can see that the line curves off to the side there. Well, it curved off to go to the sand pit, which we now call Eagle Valley Golf Course. And the other track, the one on the right, which is now Canadian National, was the Grand Trunk. And it also came off here and went east of this location straight into Queenston Quarry, the Queenston Quarry Spur. Now, we didn't go to check this out on this trip, but if you do cross over Highway 405, the abutments are still there. They're marked 1963 in the concrete. They're brand new. They constructed a $3 million bridge into the quarry and then decided that they weren't going to use it, and it was abandoned. The bridge itself was only removed about maybe 10 or 15 years ago. We are now arriving at stop number 3, which was called the Whirlpool Yard for the Hydroelectric Power Commission Railroad. This was their maintenance yard and drop yard. This whole area was much lower in elevation than it is today. In fact, what we're driving on right now has all been backfilled in. You remember from stop 1, we were talking about the Hollage Road Trail and how it led on a line through a 45-degree through the city? Well, this is the other end. This is where it started. You might have driven down Stanley Avenue, looked over to your right and said, I wonder why that building is lower than everything else. This is the Niagara Falls wastewater treatment plant. I wonder why it looks like it was built in sort of a dip or a depression. Well, the reason is because, as I said, this whole area was much lower in elevation, and when they were filling everything in to build the roads and everything else, they just didn't fill this area, and they built on top of it. Yeah, so when you're driving down the road here, you're actually driving on what was a railroad yard. just off of Whirlpool Road, there's a bike path, and if you go down the path a little bit, there's a newly constructed bridge. There's water underneath. That's the Hydro Canal. And if you look, you'll see some bridges, and these were railroad bridges. These were for the Grand Trunk Railroad, the Michigan Central Railroad, and the Niagara, St. Catharines, and Toronto Railroads. I really like this picture. This was taken around 1921, and it's a westbound Grand Trunk Railroad, number 567, and it's got freight, and it's crossing the main line GTR bridge at Whirlpool Road, right where we are right now. Now, because the canal is still under construction, the photographer is about 50 feet lower than where we are now. The photographer would be underwater if he was here right now, and you can see all three bridges. The bridges are still there today, it's just that we're higher up and we can't see them from this vantage point. We're approaching the tourist attraction called the Spanish Aero Car, and if you look over to your right towards these trees are actually what I'd like you to see. Long before we had the WeGo buses of today or the people movers of the 80s and 90s, we had the Niagara Falls Park and River Railway, which was part of the Great Gorge route. And the location of the Spanish Aero Car attraction was called Colts Point Station. And this is where the station was, and this is where you could board the Park and River Railway, and right across the street is where their maintenance car barns were. So next time that you come here to check out the view, look down the Whirlpool or watch the Spanish Aero Car going by, you can just look across the street where these trees are and imagine you're seeing this. If you know this area, you probably know it as the place where all the fishermen like to park. You have to pay for parking now at all Niagara Parks parking lots, and so they call this one Fisherman Lot. So you've parked your car and now you're walking on the bike path. If you look over to the left, you will see some stairs that head down into the gorge. That's where the fishermen go when they're going fishing down in the Whirlpool. Look back to the bike path, and up ahead on your right you see a large cut stone. That's one of the original abutments to the trestle bridge that used to be here. So 75 or 80 years ago, this whole area of land that we're walking on now didn't even exist. This was a ravine, Bowman's Ravine. Here you can see the Park and River Railroad going over on a trestle. And one of those stone abutments for the bridge, that's the pointing at the arrow here, that's the ones that we can see today at the side of the path. And here you can just see it buried in the side of the escarpment. There's a plaque here that actually does explain about the railway trestle and the buried gorge. And if you're very lucky, you might be able to brush apart some leaves and see a little remnant of the bridge that was here. Going down the stairs a little bit and then looking up to where we were just standing, this whole area is the area that was the ravine that's now filled in. The bridge is underneath here. It's so interesting to think that when you're walking and bicycling on this piece of the trail, you're actually walking on a buried bridge and a buried ravine. This is Thompson Point. Today you'll find a whirlpool adventure course ropes attraction here, but you can also walk across and have a great view of the whirlpool and the opposite end of the aero car. From here, we're also going to be able to see where the International Railway Company, that was the American side of the Great Gorge route, used to run. And, well, when I say you used to be able to see it, I mean you can see that it's almost all disappeared now. You can see in this photograph the IRC car moving along on the track at water level. Here it is. You can see that pretty clearly. And this little outcropping of rock is distinctive, so you can tell in a modern photograph that we're looking at the same area. You can't see any track. It's all been taken over by rock slides and growth of trees and plants. And here is the outcropping of rock. This location is now called the Niagara Glen Nature Center. About 15 years ago, it was called the Niagara Totem Pole and Wood Carving Park, and about 10 years before that, it was called Feather in the Glen, where they had live birds and they did raptor displays. This photograph, taken in 1923, shows the Niagara Glen Station under construction, and this building still exists today. While you're here, you can look down and see the Niagara River, and on the opposite side of the river, that's Niagara Falls, New York. Hello, America, how are you? And along the waterfront there, that is where the IRC, the International Railway Company, the American side of the Great Gorge route, used to run. This image is a postcard from 1910, and it was taken from the Niagara Glen, and it shows a Great Gorge route car heading south to the whirlpool on the U.S. side of the Niagara River. Giant rock can be seen just in front of the passenger car. That's this right here. In this photograph, taken 80 years later, you really can't see any evidence where the tracks might have been, because it's all been sort of taken over again by rock slides and trees and plants. However, you can still see the shape of giant rock, so you know this is the same area. This building, which is at the School of Horticulture, Botanical Gardens, right across from the main Rose Garden, started its life as the Great Gorge Route Station and Souvenir Store, and it used to be located at Queenston Heights Park. When the Great Gorge Route closed in the mid-1930s and the School of Horticulture opened in 1936, this building was relocated here and it became the lecture hall for the students. 30 years later, in the 1960s, a new lecture hall was built and this building was no longer used, although it did see service for a short while in the 1990s as a in-season concession stand. It was an ice cream store. If you think that this building looks a little different from the original 1920s photos, you're right. It's because when this building was placed here at the School of Horticulture, it actually was 90 degrees turned to the way that it appeared when the tracks were in the front. Where we are standing right now is a great place to park and take a look at some hydroelectric power generating stations. On the Canadian side, right here, there's Sir Adam Beck 1 and Sir Adam Beck 2. The one was created in 1922, the other one in 1954. We're also standing on the right-of-way for the Niagara Falls Park and River Railway. So where the road is today, that's where the railroad used to be. And if you look right across the river here, that's the United States, and that is the Robert Moses Hydroelectric Generating Station, and that was completed in 1961. You can't see it from where we're standing on the Canadian side. However, you can see in this 1920 photograph that right below us there was another railway, and it was called the Powerhouse Railway, and it ran from right where we are now, right along the river's edge. It ran to Queenston to join with the Niagara Falls Park and River Railway, as well as Michigan Central. And right behind where the Adam Beck generating stations are today, that area was where the Hydroelectric Power Commission Railroad was, the place that we were talking about on Stop 1. This next location is a bit of a hidden gem. Now, if you do a lot of hiking on the Bruce Trail side trails, then you probably know about it. And possibly if you used to take this area as a Highway 8 to go to the United States, you'd also know about it. Otherwise, it's a surprise. I'm standing on the Canadian side of the Queenston-Lewiston Suspension Bridge. This was actually the second suspension bridge in Queenston-Lewiston. The first one that was constructed in the 1850s was destroyed in a windstorm. This one was built in 1899 and it was in operation until 1962 when it was replaced by a newer bridge. You can see in the photograph that line on the horizon, that is the Brock's Monument that was built in the 1850s. And in a modern photograph, although there's no bridge, you can still see the Brock's Monument, so you know that we're in the same location. In 1899, when the bridge was open, somebody chiseled this inscription into solid rock. It's quite weathered today, but it is still readable. And this photograph, taken in the 1920s, shows a northbound car just after arriving on the Canadian end, and it is in the same spot that I am right now. You can tell by the way that the tracks curve, by the retaining wall that's behind them, as well as they are standing by that same rock, the one that says 1899. And I'm standing where they were standing 100 years ago. So if you're standing here and you look up, way up, you'll see something that looks a bit like a stone tower. And you might wonder what that is. Well, if you look across the river in Lewiston, there's actually two of them there too. And what these are the foundations for the towers for the suspension bridge, two on this side and two on that side. On the Canadian side, they're kind of disappearing into the landscape. They're hard to see. On the American side, they're located at the place called Art Park, and these were turned into a public art project. It's called Omega, and they put a steel observation platform on top of them to make it into a thing. So they're easier to see on that side. Queenston Docks was a very busy place back in the day. Because you couldn't get anything delivered by water from the south because there was Niagara Falls, and then there was the rapids. Instead, you had to get everything delivered from the other direction, from Lake Ontario. And that meant that you could get equipment and supplies delivered here, as well as passengers, lots and lots of tourists who want to come to the Niagara area to have fun. So many tourists would arrive on a steamship all at one time, and the grade to get up the hill to Queenston Heights and beyond to the falls was so steep that the Niagara Falls Park and River Railway actually had to put their own powerhouse, a steam-powered one, right here at the Queenston Docks to give their trolleys the extra boost they needed. one of the worst electric railway accidents in Canada happened here at the foot of the grade on York Road. It was July 7th, 1915. Many people were up at Queenston Heights Park when it started to rain. People ran to the trolley cars. One trolley car usually carried about 70 passengers. It was estimated that 160 people crammed onto the first available car they could find. The trolley car was now overweight, and the rail was wet from the rain. The grade from Queenston Heights to Queenston Docks is over 5%, which is steep, as most railroads keep to 1% or less grade. There was a mechanical failure. Reverse gear was lost. Brakes were lost. The trolley sped faster and faster around the curves until it left the tracks and tumbled down the hill. 92 people were injured and 10 people died. The railroad had had an impeccable safety record until this day, and it happened right here at the base of Queenston Heights Hill. Where York Road is today, the car road right here, that used to be the railroad. Actually, Michigan Central went right by here, where the cars are driving on today. And this piece of land that I'm standing on is the location of St. David's Station. This location does seem to be sort of in the middle of nowhere to have a station, considering the population at the time, but more than likely they needed a place to store the maintenance of way equipment for the track that was going up and down Queenston Hill, as it would have been a track that needed constant maintenance, and this would have been a good place to keep it. And if you walk just across the street, you'll see this little piece of what looks like a wall. Well, this actually was a part of Usher and Sons Cement Works that was located here in St. David's and operated between 1885 and 1904. If you know where to look, as you're walking along the Bruce Trail, you might be able to find evidence of the Usher cement that used to be here, such as the tops of the kilns. I'm not quite sure where I'm looking, so I'm not going to go searching around through the leaves today. Besides, I think this is a good spot for us to conclude our video. Thanks for joining me today on this tour of Niagara.